Okay. Okay. So here we are on this first day of our retreat together. The retreat title is Original Love Number 2. I hope everybody realizes you don't have to do sort of retreat number 1, then number 2, then number 3, etc. It doesn't work like that. This is more just facets of practice, facets of life, aspects, dimensions of the human heart and of our world and of our existence that we're exploring. So, friends, fellow travelers, wanderers, seekers, pilgrims, practitioners of the great way, thank you for gathering to support one another, to support each of us, all of us, together in our practice. It's really precious, precious, precious to do this. Don't care if it's Zoom or Zendo, doesn't matter. Zoom is the Zendo right now, and it's for real. So what are we actually doing here? What are we here for? I want to say my best answer at the moment is we're here for a greater good. What is that? Well, we don't see it all. We see fragments, pieces, shafts, rays of it now and then. Sometimes it's clearer, sometimes it's less clear, but we never get a whole picture. We don't know what this greater good is, except we get hints. And somehow our hearts know it. Our hearts sense it better than our minds. This kind of retreat in the Zen tradition, more or less what we're doing is known as a sesshin. There's sort of two words there, ses and shin. And ses is something like touching or encountering or finding, meeting. And shin, as many of you know, is this kind of untranslatable term that is often translated as mind, but that's not right. It's sometimes translated as heart-mind, which is more right. Sometimes translated as heart. It's sort of the really, who we are, our deep self. You could maybe use the word soul, kind of, but that's got so many other connotations that it may be not right either. I settle on heart right now. I think this is about finding our heart. Actually, I'm in a peculiar situation because I'm having post-concussion symptoms myself. And yesterday I had a long day on screen, and it was probably unwise in a certain way, because by the end of it, I was getting some symptoms, stronger symptoms, and they make, normal sort of thinking harder. And then I thought, well, actually, maybe that's a good thing. Leading retreat about finding the heart, less of the head. That's in a sense what we're doing. We'd usually frame it as less self, but actually less mind, less head is helpful in less self, releasing our contraction around who we think we are, releasing that, letting that go, finding our real heart and what it's called to do for this unknown greater good that it senses. This retreat is all about trust. It's about trust that reveals to us that support is intrinsic to existing. We won't find that without this trusting part, because, you know, trust is sort of the opposite of the contraction into separate self. You know, the separate self's sort of way of being is about holding and contracting because it doesn't trust. So trusting means finding we actually don't need to do that so much. So in this sequence of retreats, you know, the first one basically about, I mean, I hope this was clear, those of you who were doing it, was basically about developing, you know, more mindful awareness, present moment awareness, ways to be less taken out of that by our customary hindrances and, you know, the ways we sort of check out of the present moment, and becoming more aware of that and becoming, well, developing, you could say, some skills, some tools for resting more consistently, living, occupying, inhabiting this moment now, being here now, more. It's our life, this moment. You know, so we develop through our mindfulness, our sort of basic mindful awareness, present moment awareness practices, more capacity, more stability and resting here. And of course, meditation practice is a great training ground for developing that. Now, in Japanese terminology, in a certain sense, all of that side would be called Jiriki, which translates as self-power. It means it's something that we kind of develop ourselves. We're sort of responsible for it. It's developing some strength and resolve, I guess, too, in that area. This retreat is about really more about another term, Tariki, which means other power. And it balances that developing our self-power for mindfulness. Now, it's another side. It's finding that actually even in that venture, it goes so much better when we open to other sources of support than ourself. Can I put it like that? I'm doing it in a sense this morning because I had this, this ill-advised day yesterday that left me spinning last night and a little bit this morning too. And then I realized I have something really, really, really helpful to share with you. So I'm about to do that. But first of all, actually, just before doing that, I want to say a little bit more about, you know, the shape of this retreat and so on. And the most important thing on that score is that Valerie Forsman Roshi is with us. Thank you, Valerie. How wonderful. She has joined Mountain Cloud, and I hope many of you will be meeting one-on-one with Valerie in weeks to come. And I'm sure you will. And making, well, how to put it? I mean, she's a most marvelous teacher. So please just make the most of it, you know, so to speak. But on this retreat, actually, because these aren't sort of quite our ordinary Zen style sessions, where we might just, for example, work through koans or work through a sutra or something like that. Because I've been developing this this set of retreats that are, I felt that there was a need for a bit of a broader sort of grounding in practice. And rather than just the sort of koan way, and therefore, over actually, I think the last 2 or 3 years, really, I've been gradually evolving. It's a work in progress very much still, but gradually evolving this sort of view of parsing out different areas, zones of practice to have a more stable base. And so with that in mind, it's a little bit of a sort of, idiosyncratic thing by Henry rather than a sort of general Zen thing. And therefore, there's a certain amount of sort of almost what you could call syllabus or curriculum or something that I'm needing to impart. And therefore, Valerie and I, when we were talking about it, it's actually, I'm sorry in a way to say this, but it sort of made sense that on this retreat, Valerie will offer one Teisho and plenty of Q&A time, more Q&A than I will. But I'm sort of apologizing really for in this case feeling it was right to do a bit more myself on the talks because of wanting to share stuff that I've been evolving that is not standard Zen fare, so to speak. So it wasn't really fair to ask Valerie to step in fully on that level when she hadn't been involved in the development of this kind of retreat. So please, I hope you'll bear with us for now in that sort of plan. Okay, now I recently, being sort of a little bit concerned about, my brain power, I remembered that I'd recently been sent an essay by a remarkable person, actually, and I'm going to read a bit of it to you. She's a priest in Boston and has been for decades really working with people in great need, in dire need. And most recently, she was in Juarez, much of last year, I think, working with migrant families. And she's been writing up her time there. I feel very honored, actually, because she wrote to me recently, because she happened to have read my book and it had landed in her world at just exactly the right time when she herself had some, experiences that are, maybe somewhat like what we'd call Kensho in Zen, but hadn't really had anywhere to turn in her Episcopal world to sort of find out more about it. And had just been sort of saying, why doesn't anybody write about this? And why don't I know, if there are people who do, why don't I know them? And just the next day after writing those words, a friend sent her my book and she felt it was sort of exactly what she had been wanting to find. Now, I know, I'm not, I want to just say, I know some of you may not like my book, some of you may like it. It doesn't really matter. It's just, the book is just wind. It's one of the 8 winds, whether people like it or not. From my point of view, it doesn't matter at all. If it's got something that speaks in some way to somebody, great. And if it doesn't, I hope they'll just close it and put it away and forget about it. It doesn't matter. All these things, remember, the 8 winds, they're just wind. It's nothing at all. Books and things, it doesn't matter. Talks, doesn't matter. All these things are just means to an end. They're nothing more than that. Everything that we experience, actually, may be, from the perspective of this greater good, nothing but means to an end. I had a dream, actually, just before I read Tina's essay. I had a dream recently. While I was on that little cave retreat that I was doing up at Upaya's refuge in the high mountains a few weeks ago, that some of you know I was doing that. I was sitting all through the retreat on my own, in this little hidey hole in a hillside kind of thing. I was sitting underneath an image of Tara, the Tibetan, image of great mother, great earth, tending, giving nurturance to us all, allowing us all to exist, all beings to exist. That's sort of an image, sitting right under this Tara. And one night I had a dream where I was in some workshop, and it was kind of chaotic. We were all sort of sitting in a loose circle in a big hall, and the teacher arrived late, and he sort of dumped this great heap of recycled paper on the floor, some of it still in kind of plastic folders and things, and a real mess. And we were supposed to get sheets of paper. There was going to be some writing, and nobody was kind of organizing things. And at one point I realized, wow, nearly an hour's gone by and we're still kind of trying to get our sheets of paper and pencils together. And then I started hearing music, waltzing music, and I realized that actually there was kind of this other thing going on in the workshop where they were playing waltzes and dancing, and everybody was dancing. And actually we were supposed to be dancing, but nobody had sort of told us. And we all started dancing, and it was kind of fun, very much fun. And then it morphed into, this is going to make sense in a moment, why I'm reporting this dream. And then there was sort of it morphed into this bit where somebody was reading out a passage of some great novel like Tolstoy or something, about two people dancing and being fascinated by one another's footsteps and moves, and very enchanting piece of prose. And then suddenly that stopped, and there was this sentence spoken by this reader, which was, "The door of his heart opened and she stepped in." And it sort of, the room froze. The door of his heart opened and she stepped in. And actually in the dream I started sobbing and sobbing. And when I woke up, I was still crying. It was like opening up. It was as if Tara had stepped in, as if some great love found its way in. It can be like this in a life of practice, as many of you know, these moments when the heart just opens. And what was so beautiful really was that the retreat had seemed to be, well, like a writing retreat, or then it was a music retreat, and then it was a listening to literature retreat or something. But it was none of those things. It was about opening the heart. The heart, of course, love, feeling love. This whole sequence of retreats is called original love. Of course, it's about love. The heart, it's the organ of love. But that means it's also about heartbreak. If we don't know heartbreak, we don't know love. How can we really be servants of any kind of greater good if heartbreak isn't available to us? Does that make sense? That we have to be prepared to be broken-hearted, to serve a greater good. This whole business, of awakening, it's all about finding that our restricted view, our contracted view around self that creates other, has been too narrow to know what the real good is. As long as we're entranced by the contraction of separate self, we can't know the real good. It's right here, waiting to be known, giving us hints all the time. Okay, so I'm going to give you a big hint right now from this essay by the way, she's called Reverend Christina Rathbone, and some of you might remember, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there was a pamphlet knocking around the Zendo, written by her actually, called The Contemplative Imperative. It was a superb little essay, really, in a self-published little tiny volume, whatever, 10, 12-page little tiny thing. We had 10 copies of it, and I can't find it now. I think they all walked. But if anybody's got one, please bring it back to the Zendo library at some point. Okay, so this is all, I'm reading this because it's all about the subject, really, of this retreat: trust and support. Finding deep, deep support. At this point, she's been working for some time with various families that are trying to get into the US from Juarez, the city on the Mexican side of the Rio Grande, from El Paso, with the big Santa Fe Bridge is one of the bridges spanning the river, and it's not much of a river actually now, little concrete channel. She's been with these families, and I'm just going to pick it up. 8 full days of trying and failing to get through the border for these families. And the hope, and at this point we got the hope that the presence of lawyers will help us, and hasn't helped. And she says a prayer came easily for God's mercy to fill the hearts of the border patrol, God's courage to fill the 3 families who are trying to get across, and God's grace to course through everyone who would not get through today, bringing them what they needed in ways they could actually feel. She's a Christian priest, so she's talking with that kind of language. Let's just, put that to one side for the moment. Afterwards, I crouched down to talk more intimately to Enrique, one of the kids, and the other 2 kids. I needed to express something to them, to imbue them with some urgent thing. And it turned out to be this: how extraordinary they are, and how lucky my country is that they were hoping to move that. And most of all, however hard the next few days may be, they had all they needed already right there in their hearts. So just to get the scenario clear, this is this Boston priest talking to these migrant kids from families who are trying to get into the US. The intensity with which the kids listened to all this was sobering to the point of silencing, stunned a bit by it. and wanting also to arm them again for the reality that awaited, I lumbered back up to my feet and gently cuffed Enrique's jaunty sideways cap the way I always did. But he just kept looking at me and looking at me until he turned to follow his family single file up through the turnstiles and onto the bridge. This is the bridge that leads to the US. We were all openly weeping, even sharp-cheeked Manuel, the sinewy blonde leader whose family was now next on the list, had tears streaming down his face. Hoping for a few minutes of solitude, I began walking toward the cafe on Juarez Avenue, Avenida Juarez. But another little boy, Daniel, far smaller than Enrique and without the pizzazz, stopped me as I passed. He'd been trying to speak to me earlier, and I told him then that he needed to wait. So here he was again now, silent in front of me, with his even littler sister and his only just taller mum. I stopped, crouched down again to be at eye level with him, and then waited. For a time, the three of them just stood there in a straight line. Little boy, tiny girl, slightly taller mum. Then Danielle began to tell me what he'd been trying to tell me all afternoon, that his mother was afraid, that she had heard that the kids would be separated from her in detention, and that they would be inside for months and months, and it would be freezing, and they'd have nothing to keep themselves warm and not enough to eat. And if either of the children, he or his sister, he said, looking down at his sister for a moment, started to cry for any reason, or maybe even to squabble, that the guards would come in and beat them and take them away. Was this true? He asked, this boy who was maybe 7, and who was speaking already so lucidly and fluently on behalf of his mother, who was too afraid to speak even to me. This was what his mother had heard, he repeated. This is what people had told her, that they would be separated, even if they made just one mistake. I can't describe the hyper-intense effect this tiny boy, speaking like a man on behalf of his terrified mother, had on me. He stood so straight, and he spoke so quietly and also so clearly, because it was important what he was saying. He knew, and he might not get another chance, and he didn't want to forget anything. Is it true that me and my sister will be sent to live with strangers? He asked then. Do you have family over there? I asked. Yes. Then you will all probably go and live with them together. But they live in Orlando, Florida, he anguished, as if Orlando, Florida was the real name of hell. I tried to let him know that every kid in the world wanted to go to Orlando, Florida, because that was where Disney World was. But I don't think he'd ever heard of Disney. Mickey Mouse lives there, I said stupidly, turning to his little sister, and Donald Duck. Does Little Pony live there too? I love Little Pony, his sister said. Yes, Little Pony too, I said. And still the boy stood there, straight and as tall as he could make himself, asking his questions, voicing the fears of his family. I told him then that I was a priest and was therefore not allowed to lie, not ever, and that I had never heard of children being separated from their mother because they cried or squabbled, or of them being beaten. But it was not enough. It was as if Danielle was waiting for something. And then all of a sudden, I knew what it was. I took off the bracelet I've been wearing here every day, the one Judy Kane gave me, which reads, "Though she be but small, she is fierce." And I wrapped it round his wrist, pressing the metal ends together so they touched around his tiny arm, telling him as I did so what it said. I added that they may take it away from him in detention, but that they would have to give it back when he left to go to Orlando, Florida, and that it didn't matter anyway whether he had it or not. Because it was true what it said. He was fierce and already had everything he needed in his heart. I pointed to his heart then, and then to his sister's heart, and to his mother's heart, and told him that God lived in there, God, and that no one could ever take God away, ever. The intensity between us then must have been palpable, because a silent and creeping group of wide-eyed little ones had started gathering around us. So I pointed to each of their hearts too, one by one, and very quietly told each one of them the same thing. God is in here. God is in here. God is in here. God is in here. And then I had to leave because I was really going to utterly lose it. Okay, so the essay goes on and we'll hear more of it. But I want to say, language aside, whatever word we want to use, I mean, she's right. This is why we do these retreats, to find out what is really in here, what our hearts really are, who we really are. We can't find it as long as we're holding, contracting into being separate. I don't call it God, too many unfortunate associations with that word, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think it's something other. But this practice, in the end, is about finding who and what we really are. And what we really are, you could say it's in here, but when you find it, it's not just in here. Not at all. Not at all. You could say what's really in here is not in here. It's precisely not in here. It's not confined at all. But to find it, we have to let go of what and who we think we are. And that's not so easy to do. We can do our mindfulness practice. It's great. We can work on on ourselves in all kinds of good ways doing that we need to do. It's right to do. And that's good. That can be enough. That can be all we want from practice. We can engage in this second zone, as Henry's calling it, of trust and support. And we can find, actually, my breath. I breathe, I go on breathing. Do I ever really know what a breath is? Do I ever truly experience a breath? What a wonder it is that breath comes in and breath goes out. And without it, I die. And it just keeps coming. It just keeps happening. Of course, until it doesn't. But while I'm alive, it does. It's infinite support. It's the total support of my existence. And that's not the only thing. There's just so many trillion components of me that without them, I am not. So we can realize more and more how indebted we are. That's great. This is, one of the reasons I wanted to do these retreats is that many of us don't really get experiences, or haven't really had experiences of this, non-dual reality where self and other breaks down and we find one boundlessness. Many of us have not experienced that. We're still in a dualistic frame. And I want to praise that, endorse it, and defend it. It's fine. Dualistic practice. A lot of us, that's where we're at. Great. Let's be there. Let's inhabit it, embrace it, do the best we can. And we may get graced with a flash of the non-dual reality. I hope we do. But we may not. Let's be okay with that. And one of the important ways of being okay with that is actually this level of support. And the more we recognize support, actually, the more we can trust that we're not doing all the work. We don't have to do all the work. We can't do all the work. I want to give you one example of that to close this talk. One of the folds of the Eightfold Path is called right effort. And it has rather a specific meaning, actually. It's about when unwholesome states of mind arise, we'll do what we can to bring them to an end, and then we'll do what we can to discourage them from arising again. And when wholesome states of mind have not arisen, we'll do what we can to encourage their arising. And when they have arisen, we'll do what we can to encourage their persisting. So now, the last retreat, we were looking quite a bit at the hindrances, which would be unwholesome, examples of unwholesome states of mind, and how we work to be aware of them and let them go. Now, actually, how might right effort apply in that example, working with hindrances? Well, yes, we must do what we can to be aware of them and to note their symptomology, to get to know what it's like to be experiencing the hindrance of craving, hankering, desiring, and the hindrance of aversion, ill will, and so on. What is it actually like to have this experience? Getting to know that's part of our effort, cultivating that capacity to know them better. But at the same time, there's a side of working with them, which is letting them be, allowing them. If we're only struggling, to know them so that they can go away, somehow that's not right effort. That's not the middle way. We do that. We work to know them in the hope that, then we won't be caught in their grip so much. But at the same time, we're accepting this is what is when a hindrance has arisen. This is what is. Trusting that the moment be as it is, that our present moment experience be just as it is. And yes, at the same time, we're working to know it more intimately, to be more mindful, to be more precisely aware of what is arising, what has arisen. Two sides, middle way, both sides. Now, all of that I was reading about Danielle and the border and the suffering going on down there, and the way Reverend Tina is working, helping, supporting best she can down there. There's another point that I'm just going to touch on lightly here, and we'll explore further. But, our practice historically has been more about working on the self, releasing perhaps the self of individual practitioners, primarily. That's historically just the way Buddhism has been. But occasionally in its history, it's recognized that nations, institutions, corporations, cultures kind of have selves also, and that actually Buddhism can be applied to them as well. And I've been suggesting over recent months, and going to continue to, that this is a time and a place right now when we as practitioners need to be acknowledging our participation in a nation that also has a self and is also subject to, very clearly, to the three poisons: greed, ill will, ignorance. It's very strongly subject to those three poisons. And the idea that just doing our individual work will change the whole, well, that was a dream. It may, of course, have some validity to it, and it may not be quite enough. So I hope we will be, the Board of Mountain Cloud is engaged in a process of exploring how we as a center might do more to be working with the collective self, so to speak, of our nation. And I'm sure all of you are as well. And let's all be cognizant of the need for that. Because, there's a boundless heart in the nation as well that embraces all and knows no separation. So let us hope that as a nation we'll be finding that. And for now, as practitioners, let us be trusting our practice, our gathering, the methods that have come down through the tradition. Let us be trusting that they are in service of this greater good I mentioned, which we'll be looking at more in talks to come. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so very much for your willingness to come and practice together like this.